do that.
Okay.
Hopefully it'll save. I'm just gonna do it on two things, like on my phone too. Okay, so my name is Kathleen Gibson and I'll be conducting the interview. I'm interviewing my uncle, Martin Gibson, and it is May 21st, 2021, and it's gonna be conducted over Zoom in my home in Blowing Rock, North Carolina. So are you ready to get started?
I'm happy to.
Awesome. So first of all, what's your name?
You want my full name?
Sure.
Herbert Martin Gibson, but I've gone by Mart Gibson most of my life.
Perfect. And do I have your permission to record this session?
Sure you do.
Awesome. All right. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in the Southeast United States, primarily North Carolina. I was born in Chattanooga and lived there for a couple of years where my grandmother was. And so we would visit there every summer for the first 10, 12 years of my life, I guess. And then we were in Laurinburg and North Carolina and Scotland County, where my dad was from. And we also in the early 60s spent a couple of years in Florida, where my dad had gone for his engineering work, and finished high school back in Sanford, North Carolina.
Nice. So you attended college at Duke University. How did your college experience at Duke turn you into an activist during the 60s?
Well, it was a gradual thing. I should say that growing up in the South, we were aware of civil rights issues and inequities. Growing up, I was fortunate in that I was not raised in a prejudiced family or background, and I was raised in the Presbyterian and Methodist church, between my parents. And I can remember growing up singing songs when I was 2 or 3 years old. Jesus loves little children, all the children of the world. Red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. And that was something that I stuck in my head when I was little, and I grew up with that. So growing up in the South, we understood that things were changing, and that was a welcome sight. When I lived in Florida for a couple of years in high school, they had actually integrated there with a few students in probably 63 through 65. Whenever we moved back, I guess in 64, we moved back to North Carolina. In North Carolina, for that year, I did not. The school was not integrated yet in Sanford, but the following year at Duke was, I think, the first year that it was integrated. And
so that was like your first year at college?
Yeah, it was for first year at college, but not my first year with African American students or classmates, because of my experience in Florida. And the experience in Florida was really without incident. But it was just, so we were very conscious at the time of civil rights and of different heritage, background, I guess, of people growing up. So it was something I guess in a sense we look forward to. I did, but I don't know if that answered your question or not. But.
Well, so how did being sort of it's kind of new for you, I suppose, like the integration for the college. I mean, obviously you didn't experience that for the first part of your childhood. And so I'm sure it was very different. How did the integration sort of turn you into a civil rights activist and make you want to help out other people?
Well, in a sense, it was, there was always integration, but it was integration on a household level with, with a class structure of people that were are maids or in that were how would I say this? So we were aware of that kind of structure, and at first it's just something you grow up with and you try to understand it. It's the process of trying to understand why things are the way they are that was, I guess, an innate part of my psyche, and it's what really primed me for what I went through in the once I got to college, because I was primarily interested in the why things were the way they were, and so it was something when I got to Duke, and I was eager to see things develop, and I was not involved actually at that time in any on campus thing, because we could already see things happening and changing, and civil rights legislation was in the process of coming to the fore, and so we anticipated it as being something that was going to happen. And we knew there was going to be resistance, but how that resistance played out wasn't always clear until it happened, as when Martin Luther King was shot.
So going off of that, the assassination of both Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. happened in 1968. And how did this sort of radicalize you?
Well, that in itself was not what I would not call the radicalizing moment, which I'll get into in just a second. Along with the civil rights awareness was also the anti-war situation, that environment. And that was something that was kind of, it was happening. The draft was becoming more and more invasive in terms of all the students, like people I'd gone to high school with when we graduated from high school in '65. I don't think the draft was, I'm sure it was started at that time, but it wasn't reaching out and grabbing people like it was a few years later. And so I just never saw the need for it. I didn't think it was all grounded in the fear of the Soviet Union and China, and fear of nuclear war and all these other things. But it wasn't something that I had to deal with because I was still in college. And as I got older and got near graduation, then it was something, and as the war increased or intensified, it became something you had to deal with personally. And so I guess that's where, and that was part and parcel in my mind of the established, the status quo in both this on a state and national level of the inability of those controlling those power centers to really address the issues that faced us in an intelligent way instead of just emotionally. So when they were killed, both of them were killed as a result of the civil rights and the anti-war movement. I think because Martin Luther King had gotten more involved there the last few years of his life in the anti-war movement, kind of tangentially, but especially in terms of how it impacted the Black community. I think he was aware of that, obviously. And so when they were killed, it created a movement on campus. People that were already involved in these issues on campus came together, and they created a what was called the Vigil, which was a sit-in on the quad at Duke, out in the rain and in the sun, and we were. It was during that process that we had gone into the chapel, or some of the students had gone into the chapel to confront the chairman of the board of trustees who had come down. He'd gone into the chapel ostensibly to meditate and pray or whatever. And in the process, a bunch of students had gathered around and were asking him questions. And while we were there, I'd gone in, and also I should say that our local, the vigil was also tied in, and it got tied in with the campus attempt by the campus union of maids and janitors who kept the rooms clean and took care of us on a daily basis to do. They were trying to organize for better wages and working conditions. Mm-hmm. And at the time, we were kind of aware of that, but that got wrapped into the whole thing. So in the process of going in to the chapel to hear the students question this, the chairman, and I can't even remember, I think his name was Tisdale, Dwight Tisdale, but he was a vice president at Ford Motor Company, I guess. And they asked him, someone asked him if didn't he think they had a right to organize to express their grievances, and he as I recall, he said no. And at that point, something crystallized or something broke in my head. I don't know. I said, well, that's bullshit, you know. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I started looking into answers which were outside the mainstream for mm-hmm. solutions, which ultimately led to Marxism.
Well, we'll talk about Marxism in a second, but just real quick, you mentioned the sit-in, and I just wanted to go off that and just say, like, what other sort of like civil rights like protests were you involved with? Like, I know at one point you mentioned the takeover of I think it's the Allen building.
Yeah, that was later, and I can't remember if that was that year. That was in the spring of '68, which was my junior year, and I think it was the following year because I was more involved in the politics, on campus politics at the time, when they had the Allen building takeover of the Black Students Union, whatever, I can't remember what their group name was, but they took over to express, I think they wanted more Black studies and various other things. And so they had taken it over, and they were calling in the cops to, and this is before the people got shot for protesting, mm-hmm. but or whatever. But at the time, it was, you know, the rest of us gathered outside and were, when they brought in the police, they started tear gassing everybody, so everybody had to run, and yeah. Eventually I can't remember what the end was. I think they walked them out of at some point of at the end of the occupation. But I was involved there primarily just around maybe some leafleting and both anti-war and civil rights in the community and on campus at the time. So that's what.
So you handed out some pamphlets for anti-war stuff as well?
Yeah.
Interesting. So did you do anything else on campus to sort of protest the Vietnam War?
No big issues like that. We would establish a spot on the campus sometimes to just talk with people as they pass by and try to generate interest.
Gotcha. Well, earlier you were talking about the draft, and my dad told me about his experience with the draft and how and the lottery, basically. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to tell me your experience with the draft.
Yeah, the draft was, of course, we were aware of our exposure to the draft, and the people that were against it. There's been a lot of there's a lot of misinformation on the part of people on the right, I think, in the way they try to portray the anti-war movement at the time. And some of it was that people that are against the war were there because they were cowards or some other bullshit like that. When in fact, we were against basically against the idiocy of the government at the time and what they were doing to us all. We were in solidarity with the members of the military that had gone and had to fight or decided to fight for whatever reason. And so we did not see it as a moral thing, that they were bad people and that for going to war, and we were good people for not or refusing to go. It was basically that we could see that the motivations for going were surreptitious, and so we had to take a principled stance, which we did, and that included, in my personal case, I could go to Canada, or I could burn my draft card, or I could just refuse to go. I could go to jail and all that, or I could lose 20 pounds and they couldn't take me. So that's what I did.
Did a lot of your friends do that, or did they also have other ways?
I don't know. Most of them weren't as small as me, I don't think, so they didn't.
Okay, don't have to worry about it. Okay, what effect, if any, did the war have on your education at Duke?
Well, it had a profound effect because I mean, the war was an existential crisis or an existential threat. And here we were supposed to be getting an education to equip us to deal with the rest of life. At the same time, if we didn't do everything just right and choose the right career path at that point, we ran the risk of having to be asked anyway, or commanded to go fight in a crazy war. And so that kind of existential crisis became a motivating or a captivating interest for me. So there are things. When I went to college, I was planning on going into science, most like physics. Astrophysics was my interest, really, even though we had no astrophysics program at Duke, but they had a physics program, and I was quickly disenchanted with it because of the answers I got from from a couple of professors anyway, about the inability of dealing with theoretical issues of the field. The next year, at Duke, we had to take a religion course, which was interesting. 2 courses. First one was basic, I think, Christian theology, because Duke had been at one time a Methodist affiliated university. And the second course I took was in world religions, and the interesting thing about that was Christianity is, at least as it is taught, it's not the way I see it now, but as it was taught, it was a kind of a dualistic, good, bad view of the world, where there's essentially good things and essentially bad things, and they're at war with each other. And when I got to studying the religions of India and basically the philosophy behind it of Vedanta, which is is monistic, which means there's only one thing, and that one thing is conscious energy that manifests itself as physical things. And that ultimately became instrumental in my study and understanding of physics. But at the time, it was this epiphany when, I had it in class, because it was the first time I'd ever seen or been presented with a theological worldview that was holistic and comprehensive and took years, according to the teaching that was presented to us in class, to realize. It's not, in other words, it wasn't just a matter of saying, oh yeah, I'm a Christian now, so everything's fine. It was, or a Muslim or whatever you might convert to. It was a question of coming to an understanding, which took years of meditation and that kind of thing. So that was that was when I was a sophomore, and that was kind of a prelude to my involvement in the civil rights and Vietnam War and the rest, and Marxism even. And it was also something I came back to afterwards.
So obviously all these things definitely influenced Marxism, including the civil rights and the anti-war. And so how would you say they're all pretty much related to each other?
Well, I guess that's what I was, I guess I segued into that naturally.
Yeah.
Because it's because that worldview is that there's only one thing, and that one thing is conscious energy.
Yeah.
And that conscious energy is just matter is a form of energy. It's condensed. It's in a very specific way. In terms of physics, it can be described as a condensation of energy, of condensed or concentrated energy, and it's all directed on some level by a conscious or sentient ability to observe and respond to what's observed, and to direct energetic interactions, and that includes social interactions as well. And so if you start from that perspective of a monistic perspective, when monism is just monism means one, and so a monad is a single thing. And so it was I will say that the motivation for a lot of these issues, civil rights, Vietnam, are come from a basic existential fear that human beings have, I think, just by virtue of being human beings, of knowing that they, as human beings, they have a mortality, and they have concerns, mortal concerns. What they don't realize until they really get into it and meditate and learn and study and understand is that being human is more than just having a body. Being human is really that conscious energy. It's the soul, and that soul is something that has always been there and will always be there. And what we have to do as human beings is tap into it. And in the process of doing that, we recognize these conflicts in society in the way of civil rights and the Vietnam War, and Marxism does that on a historical level, on trying to understand trends in history. I think it does a good job of that, understanding and analyzing those trends. It doesn't do the best job in terms of providing examples of how to deal with those and solve and come to a synthesis. This ties in with the concept of the dialectic, which is something that's very much part of Marxism. but was there before in the form of from Hegel, and even before that, going back a couple thousand years, to Socrates and Plato's work concerning Socrates, which is that everything's a dialogue, and you have a statement, and you have an antithesis to that statement, which are and the conflict between those two of arguing those things out produces a synthesis or an understanding, and that is something that happens both intellectually in terms of discussion in a classroom or wherever, but it also happens physically in the world, just in the way people interact, producing the necessities of life. And when things get lopsided one way or the other, then you're going to have an antithetical trend or pressure to equalize things, and but everything works towards a synthesis in the end. And so that has been happening. It was very much prevalent when I was in college, and it's coming to the fore again now because those solutions haven't been resolved, or the solutions haven't been presented. So.
Well, while you were at, sorry.
No, that's all right.
While you were at college, what were some of the sort of like Marxist groups that you were affiliated with during your time at Duke? Or maybe just even just like groups of meetings with your friends, anything like that?
Well, after this event I was talking about in the quad, I started, just we would say networking now, but where you start, we would start, you canvass your friends and classmates, and you gravitate towards those people who share your views and your understanding of things. And so that happens in the process. Our local group, we had groups that studied Marxism and the concept of class struggle and all, and that led to formation of various groups. We had a local group that was affiliated with SDS. It wasn't an SDS chapter or anything like that, but it was in general agreement with that. And we went to some protests in the process too. We went to Richard Nixon's inauguration, and we went to some protests, and I went to one, I think, in Atlanta, and various, a few things like that. But that was we did have a group that was basically theoretically driven, but with an intention of creating a group called Praxis, which was a group for how do I say this? The goal was to engage in nothing surreptitious or illegal, because that, to our thinking, was self-defeating. Instead, it was towards trying to let me see. Let me check my notes here, because I don't want to miss this. It's basically to provide just outreach, to organize and to educate people in terms of the dynamics of society and how best to address them. And so as a result of, and this occupied my time for the first year after college, I guess. And then with the passing of the Vietnam War was winding down, and there was a resolution there that could be seen. There was the passage of the civil rights, comprehensive civil rights and voting rights legislation. It gave me anyway the feeling that we were headed in the right direction, just based on our democratic institutions, and so that coupled with a dissatisfaction for answering some of the fundamental questions that I had at the time about the soul and about the psychic nature of how things are determined. It led me away from active participation, or the opportunity certainly wasn't there, in my opinion, in the early 70s.
Well, when we talked on the phone the other day, you told me that you eventually became disenchanted with Marxism. How did that sort of come about?
Well, like I say, it was there's a tendency in certain, and it's not because Marxism is it's not a centrally controlled or propagated ideology by any means. There's a whole wealth of literature and history over the last 100 and almost going on 200 years now, I guess, of people that were follow this thinking, starting with Hegel and some others, that and where I think they got sidetracked was in the material interpretation of history, which means that history operates according to the material conditions in which people find themselves forced to work to provide their livelihood. Those material conditions became interpreted, particularly in the Soviet Union with the advent of Leninism, became converted to and along with Darwinism, I think, in the thinking of the sciences, became associated with a material concept of life itself, that consciousness somehow is a result of the matter that has evolved in a system, instead of being understood as what controls the organization of that matter, which is what consciousness does. Mm-hmm. And so, as a result of that, that lack of understanding of how consciousness and matter interact, I was not satisfied with how it presented the nature of the soul or the nature of the psyche, and I had not taken any psychology courses in college, and so I did a lot of investigation on my own in things of a psychic nature, primarily in terms of Jungian psychology, which ties in with Eastern psychology, really, Eastern thought. And that offered me some answers, and in a sense, depoliticized my investigations at that time, anyway.
That's interesting, because I mean, when people really think about Marxism, I feel like they only sort of think about how it's like an economic sort of strategy almost, and just like the political aspect of it. But the way you talk about it, it's just so different. And it's definitely interesting to hear that viewpoint, because I'd never really thought about it that way before. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Being that connected.
Well, that I will say that the economic aspect of it, Marx got some things absolutely right, and that is there's an essential conflict between the need for the nature of capital as seen as something that is monetary as opposed to human capital. And essentially what Marx was saying is that capital is human. capital, because Marx talks about a thing called labor power, and it's not labor. It's not the labor you expend. It's the power. It's the ability to produce things, which is a labor power, and that's where the real capital and that capital is there, whether it's a capitalist or a communist or a socialist or an agrarian or a hunters and gatherers, or as I like to think of the fundamental society as a browser economy, which is where people just pick the berries off the trees and eat them, that so that I'm starting to lose my train of thought here. That economic conflict, think of this, if you've got a really good system working and you're paying people for the time to go to work and things are going well, and you make the people that own the companies, they make lots of money and they're doing fine. And the people that are working, as long as they've got the income coming in, they're doing fine. Problem is that if they're in competition with each other, various companies are in competition with each other, they're going to have to drive costs down. So they drive costs down, which means you can only pay the people that are working for you what it takes to get them there from day to day or week to week. Yeah. You can't afford to pay them any more than that, because you go out of business as an individual firm. And that's what's happened in the US. It's what is called commoditized the labor of people that are working, that are for a living, so that any downturn in the system puts them out of work. They've got nothing coming in to pay. They don't have any other financial capital, because the system over years has worked it out of their paycheck. And so when that happens, you have to lay people off. And the irony is, and this is what Marx understood, I think, is that at the same time the system was producing the most things that could be consumed by the most people, it was pricing the people that could buy those things out of the market, and they end up, so that the businesses shut down or have to lay people off, and the people that get laid off or can't find work, they've got no way to make to live, basically. And that system is still with us. That internal contradiction is still with us, and until we deal with it, we're not going to get anywhere. All the very fine notions of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which I agree with and should be good, we should be there for everybody. Until we understand what we have to do to make that happen, and it doesn't mean taking everything away from everybody that has made it. It just means it really comes down to understanding the monetary system, understanding the need, the value of the human capital that's embodied in everybody, and the need and the ability of the system to compensate them as a right of citizenship, really, in order to stay alive and to pay for all the other needs that we have in the way of health and education and human services, incidentally, which 75% of which provide in our economy without any compensation or any trade mechanism, any market mechanism. It's outside the market. That's the people that take care, that raise their kids without any pay, that educate them in the values of life without any pay. So until we come to grips with that, we're fucked.
Well, lastly, to sort of just conclude and wrap up everything for this interview, I was just going to ask you, sort of like, how do you, like nowadays, how do you see sort of a resurgence of all these like ideals that you've sort of experienced in the 60s, like civil rights activism, anti-war activism, and even Marxism? Like, how is that sort of resurfaced today, do you think?
Well, it's resurfaced because the conditions that haven't changed. What happened is and I could see it happening back in the 70s even,
Mhm.
or especially in the 80s with the trend towards laissez-faire policy, which basically says that, if you privatize everything, all the problems will go away. Well, that's bullshit, because it's not going to pay all the people that whose skills are needed to go to build houses. Those skills are needed, but when the people aren't there to build them, then where do you go to get the people to produce those things? They come from Mexico, or that's what they started doing during the 80s and whatever, and they were needed, but nobody had the wherewithal to uh, address. Well, I say nobody, not enough people to address those issues and address the solutions. And so those same issues we were able, because China had this huge labor market, we were able to export the things that would have been produced in the US to China, so that China could make these products that could be bought in the US much more cheaply than they could be produced here, because they didn't have the environmental controls that we had, because of a whole host of things, because the standard of the cost of living, not necessarily the standard of living, but the cost of living was much lower there. So we externalized or exported the production of many things that put people out of work. It lowered their income in the U.S. And as long as we were able to keep people happy by buying stuff cheaply at Walmart and the like, the problems weren't, that they were able, people there were able to keep things at bay. Of course, the African American community did not have the same, generally speaking, the same, as communities did not have the same status as some of the white communities, but a lot of the white communities didn't either, because they're in working class communities. So it's a question of the amount of money you can make depends on your position in the scheme of things, and depends on how many. You might start out with nothing, and if you come up with some idea and you can sell everybody in the world enough to make $1 from each person, you become a billionaire overnight. So it's not just a matter of, of your position at birth, but it's your position in the scheme of things, in terms of what you know about the way markets work and the way, you know, all of that is structured. And so those things haven't changed. I mean, we've been able to push them to export a lot of these problems, but now we're running out of the ability to because we're not addressing the issues, we're running out of options. And so the last 4 years of the Trump administration, to me, is just it's not not a not unforeseeable. It's a response of people who are frustrated, uh, uh, and not just white people, but people that are frustrated and looking for a way to regain what they thought was lost. Well, in truth, they only had it for a little while anyway, those that had it. And what has been lost, in my opinion, more than anything, is not what people had, it's what they thought was coming to them, but they never got. And I think that's a lot of the issues in on the white right is they were anticipating things to change, and they didn't change the way they thought they were. Same has happened with African Americans as well, but they already knew where they were. So in the scheme of things, so it wasn't the surprise for them that it has been for a lot of white people, I think. So these problems are here, and we've got to deal with them. And your generation, fortunately or not, gets that opportunity.
I know. So exciting for us.
Good. I'm
Well,
glad it
thank
is.
you so much for doing this for me. I really appreciate
Sure.
it.
Well, put it on the internet.
Well, totally. Thank you so much.
Okay, you take care. Love you.
Yeah, you too. Love you too. Bye.
Bye.